think of Korea in the 1980s,
Well, I just said that.
Japan in the 1970s, 80s. What else can the Korean government do when it comes to AD then? So let's think of fiscal as well as monetary. Think about fiscal.
Reduce taxes.
Fiscally speaking, there's two things they can do, right? Meg, what are the two
Reduce
things they can
taxes.
do? Either taxes or...
Increase government spending to reduce austerity.
Exactly. So in this case, if I'm going right, either decrease taxes or increase government spending. This is the one I would say is huge for China, because when we consider capacity, right, as well. So now I'm actually bringing it back to LRS, because remember, LRS and AD can connect, right? Supply side can affect AD. So let's say Athil, China needs to build a bunch of new roads. What do they need to do when they build a bunch of new roads? What does that take? Yeah, but what are they doing, like literally? How do you build a road? Construction workers, you gotta buy concrete. You got all these contracts, right? That's new jobs. New jobs pushing us to the right. But as we build new roads, what's happening to this?
It's increasing.
That's also increasing. So it's like a cheat code, right? They're moving both. They're moving both the AD and the LRIS. Now, this is almost the exact opposite to Japan. I mean, what was shocking to me, I should have known this being Japanese, is Japan's GDP was bigger than China in 2000, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
actually
obviously,
bigger.
China's like rapidly expanding.
Yeah, and then China is much bigger by 2013. So what's happening to Japan then, meanwhile, that's limiting their
population is
LRIS?
not growing
They
as
have a
much, is
decreasing
it?
population.
Don't they have like this thing where like they pay you to have more babies? Is that?
So, I mean, two things, right? One is literally the population is shrinking, but two, the working age. And that kind of connects to what we're talking about today, right? If you have a bunch of people, that's not good, right? Because your people need to be able to work. If you have a bunch of 80-year-olds, are they going to help the economy?
No, they can't do labor.
Right? They are worthless, economically speaking, right? They're the same as a baby. Actually, no, they're worse than a baby because they're probably taking Social Security, right? So they're actually draining the system and they're contributing nothing. Now, one more thing. Let's see. Oh, no, I'm missing something here. AD, US. Oh, so let's talk about stakeholders, because this is actually really important. Really big growth, really happy. No, right? Think about stakeholders. Why is this not necessarily good for everyone? So I mean, we could split this up into a bunch of stakeholders, right? Talk about businesses, you could talk about consumers, which then could be split into
Poor and rich.
Rich and poor.
But aren't the rich have like a lot?
Talk about the government. We could talk about employment. So let's run through each one. How are businesses feeling about this rapid expansion?
Amazing.
Perfect, right?
Yeah.
They love it. They love it. It's just, if you're a business owner in China, good times. Consumers, if you're rich,
Also
it can go both ways, but probably you're
pretty
what?
good. Pretty good because they have assets. The assets, they have assets, which obviously the poor don't have, so those assets go up in prices. So
Yeah.
they're good.
So if there is inflation, which there should be based on a classical model, right? People with assets are doing better because they already have a house. And the reason why I'm kind of hesitant is,
Assets appreciate.
what if my family's really wealthy and we've had like generations of wealth? In that case, it's a little risky, right? Because maybe what was a lot of money in 1995 is not so much in 2050.
The value of money decreases.
So I always think about stakeholders, whereas for poor people, again, it can go both ways.
And then what accounts for like how much the salary is increasing? Like how much cheaper is, like when accounted for by inflation, how much cheaper is everything?
That's a great question.
That would
The
be
way
really
to understand, they have to understand how we measure inflation. Does anyone remember CPI, basket of goods and services?
It's in my consumer,
Yeah.
all over my E.
Yeah, so consumer price index, do you remember what? So countries will pick basically what to measure. Gas.
Or like the price of eggs over time.
Exactly. So there is no answer to that.
And they
Makes
can
sense,
choose that
because
to
what if
make their
I'm really
economy
into like working out, which I'm not, let's say I was, and let's say the personal gyms cost of training has gone up 200%, I will feel that impact.
More than
But Mark, who doesn't go to the gym, would not feel it, right? You would feel fine because your eggs are cheaper or something. You know what I mean? So it depends what you're making money on instead of how CPI
yeah,
is
that's
measured.
like a good eval point.
Exactly. At least at the most fundamental level, though, we can at least know rich versus poor. And I think, Meg, you already mentioned with poor, right? What do poor people not have that rich people have?
Assets.
Exactly, assets, right?
I was
So
gonna say disposable.
that's a huge difference there. Government, did they like this growth?
depends if the expansion
Yeah.
or contraction.
Super good points. This is why I'm happy like this kind of more Socratic method, right? Like I didn't even think about that. So what's happening when the economy is overheating? What's the risk of that?
Okay. If they're expansionary and they want to improve, then obviously it's better if they have 500% growth over time, right? Because they're reaching their objectives. But if they want to keep the money, like the value of their assets, and they want to like just maintain what they have now with like a stable inflation of like usually 3 to 5, then like a 500 would be something they want to take action to change.
Yeah, it's a very ugly classical, but in theory, as GDP grows, we're getting inflation, and when inflation is too hot, it's dangerous, right? For reasons like looking at the various stakeholders. So for example, if too much inflation, let's say I saved all this money, I'm 58 years old, what's my money worth, right? I've been working all these years and now everything's expensive, you know, what's all that savings I did? So again, you have to consider the stakeholders. And that's why, again, everything has a pro and con, right? So just because China is growing at 500%, it doesn't mean everyone is happy, right? Employment-wise, it's pretty good. Like growth means more jobs. But of course, as we know from the business cycle, right? The business cycle looks something like this. One thing countries are always worried about is that what happened to Japan, essentially. What happened to Japan? Japan was like that, basically, right? Where Japan, this is probably like 88 maybe. Like Japan has never recovered. That's why Japanese people don't buy stocks.
They're still scared?
Yeah, they're scared because basically if you bought a stock, let's say at 87, that stock is still worth less, like 20 something years later, 30 something years later. So this is what countries are scared of, and that's why Japan's a great warning, right? They're saying, look, even if you're growing a lot, maybe you can try to lower that, right? And that's where contractionary fiscal policies, right? So what's the government going to do then, Aziz, if they want to slow growth?
Just a
Contractional fiscal policies, what can they do, like taxes wise?
They can add that.
For who?
They can issue taxes for consumers
And?
and income.
No, that's consumers and
Business.
companies, right? Exactly. And what's the other thing they can do? Something about government spending. Should they raise it or lower it? Exactly, right? There's another word for that, a word?
Austerity.
Thank you, yes, austerity. Awesome. So you guys are drawing connections, very, very lovely.
But Mr.
Should we
Harris?
keep the recording going for a little bit? Why not, right? I never see myself teaching anymore.
Miss Harris, but also,
Yeah.
like I made $10,000, now I make $50,000. I used to spend $10,000, but now I'm spending $50,000. So as a consumer, I'm not really affected.
Super good question. So
If I'm
what-
middle
what
class,
makes it
if
what
I'm
you
middle
were saying?
class,
No, but
poor
it-
people.
Yeah, but it depends, right? And the reason I say it depends is different job sectors get impacted differently. Great example is, you guys know Silicon Valley, right, Mark? Silicon Valley, it was like farmland. No, but it was like farmland 40 years ago, right? It was like a farm before Google went there and Apple went there, right? And so going back to your question, Meg, if I'm, let's say, a school teacher in Palo Alto,
Yeah.
my life sucks because, assuming I was renting, if I was renting, my life sucks. Then I have a bunch of these millionaire Silicon Valley guys coming in.
Yeah.
it's getting more expensive.
Yeah, versus let's say I'm middle upper class, I maybe happen to own a home, and a bunch of people move into Silicon Valley. My house was worth $300,000, now it's worth $800,000. I'm gonna sell that house, move to Florida, enjoy retirement, right?
Mm.
So in short, there is no short answer to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's nuanced.
Yeah, it's nuanced, right? That it depends on who we're talking about. Because all we're talking about is averages. So your goal would be to how can you differentiate, right, the different stakeholders. But again, you guys are asking good questions. The negative is we're only like 2 slides in, right? There's like about 30 slides. So let's keep going again. I know I've been talking a lot. In about 10 minutes, 15, we'll have a break, yeah? All right, so PPCs, so what would PPCs look like? I don't think we need to go over this too much in detail. PPC, capital goods, consumer goods. Essentially, it's like this. We saw growth, the US saw little growth, Japan, no growth.
It's a potential output right?
And so you guys already read my mind. I was gonna ask all these questions about risky growth, inflation, overheating economy. I think you guys mentioned all of it. The one point maybe I didn't mention is one negative is the environment often takes a hit.
Always.
No surprise. How's China's air quality in the last 20 years?
Horrendous.
Very bad.
Does it have to do anything with their
Of
rapid?
course.
Elaborate.
Factories, they emit CO2 emissions.
Sure, yeah. they pollute, right?
And also the transportation, all the.
Unemployed or not, let's quickly just have a quiz here. Obviously, it's not graded. And it's okay if you get it wrong. Totally cool. Just tell me if you think this person is unemployed or not. A student attending school. In other words,
No.
Taha. Is Taha unemployed?
No.
He's not unemployed, right? Because he's not looking for work. A stay-at-home parent.
No.
No, he's
Yes,
not looking
yes.
at it.
Yes? No? it
No, no,
depends.
no, no.
They're not
Doesn't
looking for
matter.
work.
They're not looking for work. We're gonna
How do you know
pretend
he's not looking for work? Who said
because it's a stay-at-home parent. They want to stay at home.
Yeah, bro, if they wanted you to consider that, they'd ask it,
So
bro.
they're unemployed, they're able to.
No, it doesn't have to do with just being able to work. It also has to do with looking. We'll get there in a second. Someone who has just been fired.
Yes.
Kamal.
Yes.
No.
They are unemployed.
Yes.
It's after,
They're
it's
unemployed.
after like a year, right? Or 6 months.
They're like maybe structurally or
Friction.
fiscally unemployed.
Friction,
No.
yeah.
Fiscally.
Not fiscally.
Boss, we don't know why they've been fired.
Structurally.
We don't know why they've been fired. Actually, I don't know. Finally, someone has been looking for a job over a year and eventually decides to give up looking because they've lost all hope of ever finding a
No.
job.
No.
They're not unemployed actually because once either I can't remember the exact length. I think it was a year, or if you stop looking, you're no longer unemployed. So the only person in this group is someone who's just been fired. That's
Poor guy.
AIR. It looks real, right?
What? Poor guy, poor guy.
All right. So the definition of unemployment is the labor force, or you're dividing the number of people who are unemployed divided by a labor force. Now, what does this look like?
What is it?
Like this. It looks like you have a population, then you got a bunch of people that can't work. Like who would be in there again?
Like students.
Students,
Babies.
babies,
Old people.
old people,
People with disabilities is what I
I
was
saw
trying
them
to
seriously.
people with disabilities,
Yeah, mental or physical, right?
people that are also just not looking for work, right?
say.
And then now, this is the labor force, people who can work and they want to work. And now from here, let's say 5 million are not working. I would just simply divide 5 divided by 25, right? Because you got to do the full denominator. But Aziz, unemployment rate gives us the average for a country, but keep in mind, hidden unemployment is hard to track.
Is that like people who
Consequences of unemployment. At a more macro level, GDP goes down, right? Less people working, that's going to impact our growth. Loss of tax revenue. People are not making money.
they can't pay tax?
I can't tax income tax. Corporations are making less money. Less corporate tax. That means less money for the government. Less money for the government's not good because I want to spend that money on other stuff. When people are unemployed, some countries support unemployment.
Are there
So
any
they're
pros to that? No.
There's what?
There are no pros.
Are there pros? I mean, if we were going to be controversial,
It's probably like a niche pros.
why should some people be unemployed? So I'm going to think of it classically, Mark.
Competition.
Yeah, you're on the right thought. So what?
Like some people just aren't like qualified to work. Like,
Exactly. So
aren't
what should those people be doing?
Learning.
Educated.
Exactly. They should be reskilling, right?
That's like an argumentative point of view.
Yeah,
It's
I think
classical.
everyone
Yeah.
has some-
That's a structural.
Exactly, it's structural, and that's where, well, Mark, there's two ways, right? Either we can say the government can come in, like Germany, right, has these work programs, or if you're truly classical, let people do what they want. If he doesn't want to reskill, what's going to happen to him eventually?
He's gonna be
Unemployed.
dive
He's not gonna find a job.
He's not going to find a job. He's not going to be able to buy that thing he wants, so he's going to be forced to work, or is this, I don't know, something worse could happen to him, right? Versus the other look is, let's bring the government in. He's 52. Right, he's been like, I don't know, he's been doing something with his hands that have been taken over by AI. Government needs to show him like a way to manage, Does that make sense? So again, it's two ideological lines. Now, this last point. So now we're talking about stakeholders again. Why would unemployment impact poor people more than rich people, Coco? Why would unemployment impact rich people less?
I mean, you
than
can
poor
answer if
people?
you want.
Oh yeah, that's a one, yeah.
لا let him answer.
No, Coco's answer.
Impact rich people.
Yeah, so unemployment.
Impact poor people more.
Why would poor people be hurt more?
Because they don't have much like assets or money.
Exactly, right? When someone doesn't have a job and they already have little money, they are really scraping by versus the rich person probably has a backup plan.
Like savings.
Backup plan, right? And not only that, but generally speaking, think of a company structure. Who gets fired first? Is the CEO? No, it's people lower level, right? So it's kind of a double whammy here. You're talking about usually the most vulnerable are getting fired, and the most vulnerable also don't have the means to get through this. Last slide before the break. AI art. And at like a more societal level, like sociology stuff, again, econ's everything, right? Sociology, poli-sci, etc. It's bad. It's bad for society. Well, how do people feel when they get fired?
Bad.
I feel bad, right? They're upset. Think about
They're angry.
think about like the purpose of life too, right? A lot of people, their job is their identity, right? So to lose that means maybe they're higher stress.
Yeah, they might need their lives.
That got really dark, but no, but you're not entirely incorrect, right? Domestic violence does increase, right, when unemployment is high. Why does it increase?
Because there's too much stress.
Well, there's more stress.
They take it on.
Well, also, people are home, right? Exactly. People would be at work 40, 50 hours a week. Now they're home those 40, 50 hours. Maybe they're drinking more alcohol, right? There's a big connection with alcohol and domestic violence. So you're getting all this bad stuff. Homelessness, etc. Family breakdown. Maybe that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it with the first half here. Good stuff, guys. Thank you, Meg, for recording. Let's go ahead and take a nice long break. Come back. Alia, can you think socially? And I'm gonna get really crazy here. Think about 1930s Germany or Italy.
Yeah.
That's my little hint. I don't say I think I know Federico. Why would young people matter more in a lot of ways?
Oh, because like, you need them for the workforce and like innovation.
But socially speaking.
Yeah, would it be like, so if they're not educated, if they're not working, then
No, 'cause-
they like revolt.
Yeah, more or less correct. So if you look at, for example, the Great Depression, right, hits in the 30s. If you look at Weimar Germany, back in the Weimar Republic, or Italy, a lot of people unemployed. And what happens when young, especially men, are unemployed?
Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
Oh, I
Organized,
think
like,
I know why.
Exactly, they join gangs, right? Like in Greece, this was a problem. Like 30% of young men are unemployed. They go to the bars, they're getting drunk, they're getting in fights. Not saying 55-year-olds don't do that as well, but just it's more.
Like you don't want the 30-year-olds to be doing that.
Well, you don't want 25-year-olds, right? So it's just like when you start multiplying that into thousands, right, of 25-year-olds versus thousands of 55-year-olds, the youth unemployment is a problem. And final point about youth unemployment, is it usually higher or lower than the rest of society?
Higher.
Why do you think so?
Because there's more looking for jobs.
No, because there's people.
less experienced.
Companies would rather hire people.
Exactly,
Yeah,
what
why
these
would
guys
you
are
have-
saying.
Why would you hire like an unexperienced 20-year-old when you can get an experienced 45-year-old?
Exactly. On average, a 45-year-old is more coveted than a 25-year-old, just in most industries. Unless you're talking like soccer or something. That'd be one of the few exceptions.
I would hire.
Like boxing or something, yeah. In most cases, a 40-something-year-old. So that's why it's good to know that. Ethnic differences and gender disparities, I don't really want to go into detail. Obviously, this is a whole nother thing we could go into, but
Racism.
just know it exists, right? Yeah, there's racism, there's sexism, and that's why you can't just pay, oh, unemployment's 5%. It's not good enough, because maybe for black people it's 20, for white people it's 3. That's a problem.
Oh no.
Right?
Racist.
We need to address that. But again, we don't need to go too deep into that. You just need to know that exists. All right, so let's go ahead and actually draw this. So go ahead and just copy exactly what's on the board on a piece of paper.
What is ASL?
Yeah.
Long run, I think.
We're going to talk about it. So go ahead and I want you to draw it first. 100% for profit. Think back to micros. The principles are super similar. ASL, right? The laborers, the supply of laborers. The supply of laborers goes up as what goes up. Quantity goes up as what's going up.
The rate.
Wage.
Wages.
Does that make sense? More people want to work if they get paid more.
Yes.
Makes sense, right? No disagreements there. And vice versa. These are the companies. The companies want to hire, let's go, fewer people as what goes up. The wages go up,
Yeah.
right? This too makes sense in principle, right? All right, so the point right here, Ryan, is the E word. Yes, equilibrium, right? This is a brilliant point because this is the agreement. The workers and the employers agree. I will work for this much. I will pay this much. Everyone is happy.
Like demand shifts, right?
Yeah, demand shifts. Yeah.
And with
On
demand
classical. Are we talking classical right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you demand shifts to the right, okay? And there's an increase in inflation, but you can also make the argument that in the labor market,
Yeah. Oh,
prices
exactly.
are going up.
100%. So you could say both go up at the same
Yeah.
time, but
Yeah.
that's usually the goal,
Exactly.
right? Because you don't want inflation,
Yeah.
but you do want growth. Yeah.
So why when average wage rate? Why if it shifts to that, it's going up, yeah?
So this is the workers. The workers are willing to more workers, more hours, the higher the pay. The businesses, as the pay gets higher, what's happening to the number of workers they hire, Aziz?
Going low. Oh.
Does that make sense? It's getting
Yeah,
fewer.
yeah.
Now this is the magical point, right? But this is where it connects back to semester 1. Aziz has been on fire lately. Let's see if he continues his
No,
streak.
but
Yes.
So if the average wage rate goes up, wouldn't like more employees, more like workers would want to work, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. But what's the problem with that? And maybe you can get to that right now.
Businesses aren't tired, wouldn't tire.
Yeah, exactly, right? So let's talk about minimum wage. Do you guys remember price floors and ceilings? Price floors and ceilings? And I'm putting it like this because, man, a price floor means I can't go up any higher, and ceilings means I can't go down any lower.
Yeah.
So if government says, hey, you must pay a certain wage,
That's ceiling.
that is an example of, you can't go any lower, is what they're saying.
Closed door.
Yeah, this is an example of a price floor, right? So this is where our eval is getting deeper now every time. I'll call this one. Why would the government set a price floor? Shouldn't they just let people do?
Ethics.
Elaborate.
They can't, they would make kids, like, people work for really that cheap and they wouldn't be able to survive for themselves. So they put a minimum wage to, like, ensure that they can survive, they can put food on the table.
It's ensuring survival, right? So how do these states calculate it? They'll figure out, well, how much is cheap rent? How much is cheap food? People need to have some entertainment, right? $50 a month. They get all that information. They divide it by 160 hours a month, and boom, they figured out an hourly wage. Now, classical economists, do they like minimum wage? They hate it because what is the goal of classical economy?
You get what you work for.
It's a free market.
As little government intervention as possible, right? So you notice something happens here, right, with our labor. We now have, I don't like that color, let's just try blue. Let's try orange. So what has happened now is our workers with a higher wage, do we have more workers or fewer workers?
More.
We have more, right? Because people are willing to work if they're getting paid more. However, the companies, if it's more expensive, are they hiring more or fewer workers? They are hiring fewer workers. This gap right here is a problem, right? This gap between Q1 to Q2. This gap right here, this is representing too many workers, right? Without enough. Well, in other words, yeah, it's a surplus in workers, right? Or, in this case, what have we been talking about the past 30 minutes? Yeah, these people are unemployed because they're looking for work, but that work is not there. So it's really important as we talk more and more about evals that you guys understand both sides, right? There is an argument for minimum wage, right? The argument is we can't let corporations take advantage of workers. People need like a minimum survivance thing. We can't hire corporations will take advantage of people, right? But then the other argument is, well, if we do that, it's actually worse because now we have unemployed people. So sure, you guys are getting paid more, but now 3 people have no job at all. So full employment is the goal, but keep in mind, even in full employment, we have a little bit, right? We've got a little bit of frictional, right? We've got a little structural. In fact, it's not good to have like 100% employment, right? Why is that, Natalia? Why don't we want everyone working 100%?
Zero competition.
No competition. And actually, Aziz, sorry, I didn't give you the full answer. Trade unions can also help. Does anyone remember what trade unions are?
They're not like the rich workers.
And again, I want to really make you guys focus on the good and the bad. Why are trade unions good, Athil?
The work is
Ethics.
Thank you, Athil. What do you mean ethics? You guys are being too vague. Ethics is actually very deep. Yes.
It's like it make like. Can I just give an example?
Sure.
Like if let's say you work minimum wage at McDonald's and you demand for more pay, they'll just fire you because you're replaceable and they don't really care about your rights. But if there's the union is like strength in numbers. If everyone's asking for another $1, okay, and they go on strike, then they have to pay.
Exactly. So it's strength in numbers, right? It's people can get together. Teacher unions, there's accounting. There's even just a union
Is there a
where it's
teacher union?
various
Is there a teacher
people
union
join.
at the school?
No, there's not. Yeah, public schools have teachers. Ways. Continuing with trade unions, it's also protecting worker rights. So what are worker rights like? Days off, sick days off,
Geneva Convention.
mother got cancer, can I get bereavement? Right? So why would companies say no to that?
Because they don't want to spend.
They don't care about
Yeah, from a company's point of view, what do they care about the most?
profit.
That's all they care about, right? And what happens if his mom gets cancer, he takes 2 weeks off,
Less profit.
yeah, and he still gets paid. That hurts my company, right? So trade unions do have a pro, but now also think of the cons. What's the problem with trade unions? It costs more money. That's really the bottom line. But some would argue, if you were to go one step further, they would say that they're also inefficient. What do they mean inefficient? So schools is a great example.
They're hard to organize, I would say that.
We're not talking about pros and cons of trade unions.
Affiliated.
You're talking about the actual
Union.
functions of unions. They are, it could
Like,
be.
what
Yeah.
do trade unions do in terms of like employment?
They can help with negotiating contracts. Yeah, so I mean, it's a big deal. And again, that could be what also pushes that, to answer Aziz's question. Government, or like you have 100,000 people in the union, and they all say we will not work below W1.
Yeah.
The company has no choice.
Stakeholder, it costs the businesses money.
Yeah.
It's okay. Let me tell you the difference. If it's a public school, there's 100,000 teachers on strike. Wallah, they don't have a choice. Because how hard would it be? Like, because to an extent, it's harder to replace 100,000 teachers than it is to pay each of them $2 an hour more. But for a private hospital, let's say there's like 10 surgeons on strike, and they all want an extra 200K a year. Like, wallah, they'll find more.
No, I'm talking like.
That's what I was thinking too. So I mean, these are all hypothetical, but what I had in mind actually is you would probably bring them to the negotiation table.
Oh yeah, or you just
That's
negotiate.
what would happen. Yeah, they'd come to the negotiation table. The company would say, "Look, we'll pay you 15% more.
Well,
Can you
that's as much-
please not strike?" And then the workers might be like, "Okay, 15%
What if I
more."
just hit my company? Okay.
You get fired.
No, that's not-
But yeah, just now you
Because
have
like,
our.
if the vote is like 9 to 10, like one person is getting greedy, they'll just fire.
All right, we're almost there. We're about 3-4 minutes from finishing. So, what are some ways to get rid of this? Well, one obvious one is get rid of minimum wage. Another one is get rid of trade
We
unions
need minimum
That's
wage.
very
That's how-
or
that's how-
weaken them. What, say that again, Mark?
You can't abolish minimum wage
Why?
because that's how we prevent child labor. That's how you.
Why
that's how
don't no children don't have to work?
No, that's how you prevent like minorities getting taken advantage of.
Why
Because
is the
they-
minorities?
Because let's say you get some guy from like Lahore.
Mhm.
Yeah, he is.
Mm.
You get some guy from like Lahore
Mm.
who was getting paid $3 an hour to like fix bicycles.
Yeah.
And then he moved to the US, and then his employer asks how much are you getting paid in Lahore. He says $3, and then the employer's like, I'll pay you $5.
Okay.
Okay.
But does he agree with that?
He does because it's like,
What's wrong with that then?
It's $5. He does like a neoclassical economist would agree,
Hmm.
but it's unethical because the minimum wage makes sure like,
Who decides ethics?
huh?
Who decides what's
Society
ethical?
does. Society like if
But wouldn't that person decide?
ethics are like the moral values that a society believes are like
Yeah.
acceptable.
So the guy agrees with it.
The guy agrees with it,
And the employer
but,
agrees
But then
with it.
let's say you show like 30 other people this scenario.
Yeah.
Okay, like there's a guy at McDonald's getting paid $15 an hour
Yeah.
because he's American. Like it just doesn't make sense. Like you need minimum wage.
Even if we are being inefficient.
Maybe it's a little inefficient, but like it's still like not like it's like the number one rule of economics is nothing's 100% efficient.
Also, me is this is done by the government. Imagine a video gets leaked that the government is like exploiting random immigrants. You know how unpopular they're gonna be. They're gonna go out of power in a second.
I love-
even in
What happens?
general.
What happens when you have a guy at
Government's
McDonald's and then the employer's like, I'm only gonna pay you $7 an hour, and the guy says no. You can't
I
be fired.
love where you guys' mind is. So the reason why I'm letting them talk is, Taha, are you taking TOK?
We all take TOK.
I asked that one student that's not taking TOK if he's
Yeah.
taking. Yeah. Oh, okay. So some. So kind of what you learn in theory of knowledge. One thing to be careful of though is there things like ethics. Like I keep saying ethics and morality.
Gray areas.
I would try to stay away from those words because yeah, again they're gray, right?
subjective.
The only things that are concrete would be words like trade unions and minimum wage. They are inefficient. That's an objective statement, right? An objective statement would be something like people, if people are not paid enough to survive,
Let me
then they can't survive. Does that make sense? That's an objective statement, right? A subjective statement is saying like $5 an hour is unfair. It's unfair. It should be 10, right? That depends, right? Because some people do have the perspective, if you have at least a bed and you got electricity and like water and eggs and bread, you're good, right? But then there's also people that would say that's not minimum. Like minimum is, you need to have at least Netflix and, you know, like a decent phone that's at least an iPhone 6. So again, don't get too caught up in ethics, because it's too much of a quagmire like to navigate.
So let me flip the rule on you. Why do we need a minimum wage then?
Why? Do we not, or do we?
Why does minimum wage exist if it's so inefficient?
Yeah, because the bottom, those most vulnerable in society, need a certain amount of money to survive, and if we let
Wait,
employers,
what countries don't have minimum wage?
what countries don't have it?
None.
No, I'm sure there's.
Basically, China, India,
Like
You
you
don't
know,
have minimum
can I give
wage?
it time?
not unofficial.
No, it's when you have minimum
Yeah.
wage, you're like it makes a lot of economic inequality, because then you have like that's when you get like the classes like that are really divided, because you
Korea,
either
like
work
Korea.
and you get paid a really low minimum wage, or you work a good job, and there's no in between. It's like in Parasite.
So you're
Yeah, yeah,
saying
social
minimum
disparity.
wage increases disparity? That's possible. Again, almost everything we talk about now can go two directions. Always keep that in mind. Everything we talk about, you could say minimum wage good, minimum wage bad, right? You could say unemployment is low. That's great. Oh no, it's too low. Does that make sense? Oh, we're growing. Great. Oh, but we have inflation, right? So I like where you guys' minds are. Actually, we did made it. So
We did make it.
next class, because I just want to stay even with A and D, is that we've talked about these, I think, a little bit. I think I kind of jumped the gun. I think the other sections actually haven't looked at it, but we touched upon. But now we're going to go really into detail of all four of these, and then the end is close. Next week we meet twice, Monday, Wednesday, and that's it with new material. We review. I think 2 classes the following week, and then test, and that's it.